Hello my friends, in today's video we will take a look at Fujifilm X100VI. I think that it is fair to say that this is the only digital camera that gained legendary status before it even got into the hands of paying customers. Besides that, it basically creates a new category of cameras that are desirable as fashion accessories as much as they are desirable as devices that take stills and video. Despite that, Fujifilm has done a lot to make it very capable and technologically advanced. In this review, we will take a look at the performance and the features of the X100VI to find out whether it can match those incredibly high expectations. First of all, the design and the appeal of the X100VI is a real deal. Pretty much everybody who saw it asked me about it, and those people were not camera enthusiasts. I have never experienced anything like that before. People were specifically asking whether it is a film camera, so I guess that the vintage styling is definitely done right. I personally think that it is the best looking camera on the market, especially in the silver version. Another thing that I enjoy about the X100VI is the size. It is just 12.8 cm wide, 7.5 cm tall, and it weighs 521 grams including the battery and the lens, of course. It is very compact and it has just enough heft to feel like a really solid, well-made product. It uses a magnesium frame and, importantly, the bottom plate also seems to be metal. I also really like the shade of silver color used on the upper part and the lens. The rest of the surface is rubberized with a nice grippy texture. It is weather sealed except the front element of the lens, so if you want full weather protection, you need a filter to protect the front element. Much like all X100 predecessors, the 6 uses 23mm fixed lens, which translates to 35mm full frame equivalent. It is the most popular focal length for reportage and all-round use, so I think that it is an obvious choice. The exterior is where the vintage stuff ends with the X100VI because it uses Fujifilm's latest internals. It uses X-Trans 5 HR 40MP backside illuminated APS-C sensor combined with X-Processor 5. It is the same combination that I've already tested in the XH2 and X-T5, so there isn't really anything new that I can tell you about it. The ISO performance is roughly the same as with the X-Trans 4 in X100V, maybe a tiny bit better, despite that the base ISO has been lowered to 125. ISO 3200 is perfectly usable for most situations, but keep in mind that Fujifilm uses SOS ISO scale. The dynamic range is improved over X-Trans 4 cameras and not that far from full-frame cameras. Especially at the base ISO, you won't notice much of a difference in comparison to full-frame in real-world situations. The differences will be bigger at higher ISO values, but for APS-C it is probably the best performance that I've seen so far. 40MP on APS-C is a relatively challenging resolution, so let's see whether the lens on the X100VI can match that kind of pixel density. The resolution at the center of the frame is already very solid at f2. The contrast is a little bit weaker, but f2 is definitely more than usable. The contrast is significantly better at f2.8, where you can get really good image quality in every way. There is further increase of contrast at f4, where we can see pretty much perfect image quality. f5.6 looks about the same. There is a tiny bit of diffraction already at f8 and a lot of diffraction at f11. f16 is unusable. The corners are actually very solid as well. The resolution in the corners is already very good at f2, but the contrast is weak and there is some chromatic aberration. The contrast is already much better at f2.8, where the overall image quality is very good. f4 and f5.6 look pretty similar. The diffraction is again visible as soon as f8, and I recommend avoiding f11. Overall, I am very happy with the optical qualities of this lens. Considering that it is a pancake lens with negligible size, the performance is actually very impressive and it definitely exceeded my expectations in combination with a 40MP sensor. It is an f2 lens, which makes it pretty suitable for low light. The rendition of bokeh is quite pleasant. It is not the smoothest bokeh that you will ever get, but it has a lot of character and pretty distinctive look. A nice feature is integrated 4-stop ND filter, which is nice to have for long exposures or even for video. I'm also very happy with the colors. I took the X100VI to northern Vietnam, where the weather was unfortunately cloudy or overcast all the time, and I can say that the X100VI can handle these situations extremely well. Automatic white balance is excellent in every situation. It won't make the scene too warm or too cold to make the pictures artificially more interesting. The X100VI offers all of the film simulations that have been available so far, including Reala Ace, which is the latest one. It is a very neutral film simulation with slightly different tonality than their standard simulation. I like it a lot and I use it as my default choice at the moment. Previous X100 cameras struggled a little bit with the autofocus, so how is it with the X100VI? In normal situations, the autofocus works really well. It is fast and accurate, and there isn't really anything that I can complain about. The most noticeable improvement in comparison to X100V is the performance in low contrast and low light situations, where the X100VI performs much like other Fujifilm cameras. The autofocus motor in the lens is not the fastest one out there, and you can also hear it if you are in a quiet environment. The tracking is actually a positive surprise. I was able to get perfect hit rate in my walking towards the camera test at f2 even in pretty difficult light conditions. This camera isn't really meant for fast action, but the autofocus can handle tracking in reasonable situations very well. The X100VI can shoot up to 20 frames per second with electronic shutter and 11 frames per second with mechanical shutter. That is not bad for a camera of this type. The problem is the buffer. It can only take about 35 compressed RAWs, which is not great. On the top of that, the X100VI only has one UHS-1 card slot, so the buffer clearing is pretty slow. I'm not sure how many people will use X100VI for continuous shooting, but the buffer will limit its capabilities in this regard. In video, the autofocus works completely fine in reasonable, easy situations. It isn't necessarily bad in more difficult or even extreme tests. It can focus accurately even in difficult situations, but the smoothness and the speed of video autofocus is not always consistent. There may be a pause during the transition or some hunting when focusing from close distance to infinity. It probably doesn't matter that much with the X100, and the autofocus in reasonable situations is fine, but there is a room for improvement. As usually, I am still not happy with the autofocus area options in video, where you can choose between the whole frame or single point and that's it. Overall, I am happy with the autofocus in stills. That is more than good enough for intended purposes, but the video autofocus could be better and I hope that it will be. Another huge improvement over previous generations is the in-body image stabilization. First of all, offering any kind of in-body image stabilization at this size and with challenges associated with having a fixed lens is very impressive. It is also a necessity for a meaningful use of a 40 megapixel sensor. Fujifilm rates this IBIS system for 6 stops. I was able to get sharp images at 1/10 of a second consistently, and even 1/5 of a second is possible. That is a good result, all things considered. In video, it helps a lot with static shots, panning and pointing the camera around. If you need more stabilization, you can add digital image stabilization, and you can also use the Boost IS on the top of that, which works great for static shots. In-body image stabilization is definitely a huge step forward for the X100 series, and it makes Mark VI a much more capable camera. X100VI is primarily meant for photography, but it also has very solid video specifications. There are some caveats though. You have two options to shoot 4K. The first option is no crop 4K, which combines downsampling and pixel binning. The second option is fully downsampled 4K HQ, but with a 1.23x crop. It can also shoot 6.2K with the same 1.23x crop. The image quality in the 6.2K mode is really nice. It captures plenty of detail as expected with a fully downsampled video. Non-HQ 4K is very nice as well. I would say that the video quality is very similar to what you would get with previous generation of Fuji cameras such as X-T4, which is not bad at all. The bitrate goes up to 200 megabits per second, which is more than enough for this type of camera. Importantly, the video is 10-bit 422, including 6.2K. A very pleasant surprise is that it shoots 4K 60p with an acceptable 1.15x crop. F-Log 2 is also available and it is one of the best log profiles on the market. Also worth mentioning is that the video mode is accessible in the dry mode menu, which is not the fastest solution, but it is fine. Overall, if you want to use your X100VI for video from time to time, it is completely fine, but it is definitely a better stills camera than video camera. The handling of the X100VI is actually very good despite the size and vintage styling. The grip is large enough to allow it to hold the camera securely. It has dedicated dials, the combined shutter speed and ISO dial, and aperture ring on the lens. I personally use them, it is very engaging and I like it. If you don't want to use them, you can use the front and rear command dial. It also has an exposure compensation dial and autofocus switch mode, which is very nice to see. The X100 series does not have a D-pad, but I only realized that as I was writing this review. The joystick works really well for navigation. Surprisingly, there are 4 buttons that you can set up however you want to. One is on the top of the camera, one is on the front side, and 2 remaining buttons are front and rear dials, which can be depressed. If you add swipe gestures and the Q menu, which is in my opinion the best of all brands on the market, you will definitely be able to have very quick and easy access to all of the options and features. The main menu is fine, much like on other Fujifilm cameras. It is pretty well organized, but there is still no touch functionality. Fortunately, X100VI is not that complex, so you won't have to use the main menu that much. I have to say that I greatly enjoy shooting with the X100VI. The handling in combination with the styling and compact size make it a very engaging device, but more on that later. The display has been carried over from X100V and that is completely fine. It uses a 3-inch 1.62mm dot panel. It is more than sufficiently detailed, bright, and the color accuracy is very solid. Fortunately, the X100 series was spared from having a rotating screen, so the X100VI still uses a 2-way tilting mechanism. The hybrid viewfinder has also been carried over. You can switch between electronic viewfinder and optical rangefinder. Electronic viewfinder uses 3.69mm dot panel with 0.66 time magnification. It is a very solid EVF, not the biggest one, but it is sufficiently bright and very sharp, so no complaints. Optical viewfinder or rangefinder is very nice to use as well. It has a magnification of 0.52 times. Just like the controls, it contributes to the user experience, so I appreciate that it is available on X100VI and I use it most of the time. As expected, the X100VI uses the smaller NPW126 battery with 1260 mAh capacity. The CPA rating is up to 450 shots, which is actually quite good for this type of battery. In reality, I was able to get through a typical day of travel photography with a single battery. You can also get about 63 minutes of 4K video on a full charge, which is again not bad. In-camera battery charging is pretty fast at 7 watts. To sum up, Fujifilm X100VI is obviously a winner. Fujifilm took their immensely popular X100 line, used their latest internals, and they added in-body image stabilization. Realistically, there was no way that it wouldn't work. The only questionable point for me was the performance of that tiny lens in combination with a 40 megapixel sensor, but I can say that the lens can match that kind of pixel density much better than I expected. The in-body image stabilization makes the X100 line a lot more all-round usable. The X100VI delivers when it comes to looks, enjoyment, and output. For me personally, it is the most enjoyable camera on the market. It is not quite perfect though. The autofocus in video could be better in more difficult situations. The buffer capacity in combination with slower UHS-1 card makes it somewhat less suitable for fast action. The video specifications are solid, but a smaller crop in HQ and 6.2K would be nice. Despite that, I am extremely happy with my X100VI. It also sends a very clear message to other camera brands. Don't be boring. There is a market for out-of-the-box cameras, so don't be afraid to bring out the X108, LX103 or Pen F2. Needless to say, Fujifilm X100VI is one of my all-time favorite cameras that I've ever tested, so if you can somehow get one, I highly recommend you to do so. So that's it for this video, thank you for watching, I hope that you liked this video and that you have found it to be useful. Stay tuned for more videos and maybe consider subscribing if you don't want to miss my future content. I appreciate your feedback in form of thumbs up or thumbs down. If you would like to ask anything or share opinion, please do so in the comment section, and see you next time.